Keep plugging away. So what are we doing here today? We're here to actually celebrate a great nation. Now, despite the title, I want to assure you, I view the United States as the greatest nation on the planet and has a history of positive impacts on the lives of Americans and of the world. Now, although he's not able to be here today, this was co-written with Dr. Ed West, the other museum historian who's going through some health challenges right now, so hopefully we'll get him back up to the podium soon. But every lecture that we do, believe me, his thumbprint is on it. And that's literally he and I last week on his porch, fine-tuning this particular lecture for you folks. And one of the fun things about working with Dr. West is he's slightly older than I am. And been around Summerville a lot longer than I have been. And I'm originally from Philly. You know, I retired from the military here, got here in 2009 from Germany. And so he says, oh, that's not how we do things around here in Summerville. That's not how we say things here in Summerville. This is what you got to talk about. So, I guess, sir. Yes, sir. So this is a nice mix of him and a nice mix of me. So I love it when we get to work together. But when we study the history of the United States of America, we rightfully focus on the nation's achievements, its founding principles, economic growth, technological innovations, and our ever-expanding democracy. To fully understand our nation's story, we also got to examine the challenges and the injustices that many Americans have faced. History of the United States is not only a story of freedom gained, but also a story of freedom denied and freedoms continuously fought for. To be precise, the story of the United States of America and the start of this 250 years begins during the American Revolution. Getting ready for you. With this being the case, we must acknowledge that one of the ugliest, remember this lecture is titled America at 250, the good, the bad, and the ugly. One of the ugliest aspects of American history was actually started by the government of Great Britain, who established enslavement of African Americans barely 10 years after the start of colonial America and what we call Jamestown, the Jamestown Settlement in 1619. The American Revolution provided our founding fathers with the first real opportunity to chart a different path. The first real opportunity to make it clear that our new nation would be better and more just than it was under Great Britain. That first opportunity was placed on the quill pen of Thomas Jefferson, despite the fact that he was one of the largest enslavers in Virginia. He still showed us the path to making a better nation. Now, what I want to talk to you about today, if I do this the way I want to do it, we're going to talk about some of the challenges, but we're really going to focus on how those foundational documents made the freedoms for everybody possible, and how we're still striving to live up to them today. Although rarely discussed in American history, Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration of Independence, which is the document for which we established our nation's birth date, July 4th, 1776. We were not free on July 4th, 1776. We were not free until 1783, after we won the Revolutionary War and signed the Treaty of Paris. But isn't it like Americans? Nah, we're going to take this date. We said we were free then, and we sticking to it, right? So no matter what the reality was, this is our birthday. So we're going to roll with that. So the first draft Declaration of Independence, to me, signaled the true future of our nation. The true meaning of the words, all men are created equal. Here is a quote from Thomas Jefferson's first draft, which the Second Continental Congress quickly rejected. He says, kind of long, so I'm going to quote it. He, King George, has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain, determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce, and that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished dye. He is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them, by murdering the people on whom he has obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another. Now you read this, you would think, man, Thomas Jefferson hates slavery. And he understood that it was wrong. That was what the Declaration of Independence was supposed to say. That was the first draft. Anybody ever seen that before? Anybody never seen that before? You can admit it, you've never seen that. That's the original first draft of the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote. Unfortunately, the newly liberated United States of America chose to continue this piratical, lawless warfare, this opprobrium, public disgrace, of infidel powers, this execrable, detestable commerce for another 89 years until the Civil War. Why? The first reason is because our founding fathers, many of whom may have agreed with Jefferson's sentiments in that first draft, knew it would cause a fracture in their fragile unity with 13 truly independent colonies with competing priorities. The anti-slavery delegates knew the future they hoped for would never be possible without first unifying these colonies, so they accepted slavery for them. Second reason, an equally strong reason, was money. Washington, Jefferson, and the slaveholding elite knew the United States was morally wrong to continue slavery, but their livelihoods depended on it. This new nation would quickly go broke without the free labor of enslaved Africans. Jefferson makes that clear with his most famous quote about slavery, when he said, "We have the wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale, and self-preservation in the other." That's an honest description of slavery in the United States during the 1700s. A very honest description. And another example of Jefferson's unclear personal position on slavery, let's look briefly at his correspondence with free black scientist and inventor Benjamin Banneker. If you don't know, Benjamin Banneker is a black man who played a pivotal role as an assistant surveyor and astronomer on the team that laid out the initial boundaries of Washington, D.C. In August 1791, Benjamin Banneker exchanged letters with then Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. Banneker sent a plea for racial equality and an end to slavery, enclosing a manuscript of his astronomical almanac as proof of black intellect. Jefferson's reply was polite, but politically cautious. Banneker challenged the hypocrisy of slave ownership in a newly liberated nation. He directly quoted the Declaration of Independence, written by Jefferson, to argue that all men are created equal. As evidence, he included a manuscript of his 1792 almanac. Banneker argued that his original astronomical calculations proved that black Americans were not intellectually inferior to whites, as Jefferson wrote in the Notes on the State of Virginia, where Jefferson claimed black Americans were intellectually inferior to white people. He used fake science to justify slavery and white supremacy. In his response, Jefferson thanked Banneker and claimed to support raising the condition of our black brethren. Those are Jefferson's words. Jefferson admitted he wanted to see a system that improved the conditions of their bodies and minds, but he refused to address the hypocrisy of slavery directly. Despite the first missed opportunity, the 250-year period we're celebrating today was made possible because of the extraordinary courage and commitment of men like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Samuel Adams, Nathaniel Greene, Francis Marion, John Lawrence, and my favorite womanizer, Benjamin Franklin. If you don't know, Benjamin Franklin was a hoe. Plain and simple. I admire him so much. These men and thousands of American patriots, black and white, worked together to fight for our independence and establish a government designed to work for all Americans. What made this extraordinary accomplishment possible? Simple. It was we the people. When we talk about America at 250, the good will always include those truly dedicated to we the people. Things go awry in America when people focus on I and not on we. It was when we the people filled the streets in protest to British taxes and the exploitation of colonial Americans. It was ordinary people who have organized resistance to British rule. It was when we the people, including a black man named Crispus Attucks, who was the first to die for American independence, protested alongside white Americans during the Boston Massacre. It was we the people who formed local militias to protect our communities, fighting with our own guns and ammunition. This included enslaved men like Prince Estabrook, who stood along his white commander, Captain John Parker, on Lexington Green during the shot heard around the world, when Captain Parker shouted those world-changing words, "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have war, let it begin here." It was we the people who held it down, long before a true Continental Army was formed. Who were those people? Were they the aristocrats who would eventually benefit the most from this effort? No, they were the carpenters, the masons, the shoemakers, the farmers, and yes, the housewives. But what else were they? That is often left out of this story. First, they were predominantly newly arrived immigrants, which made up 40% of George Washington's army. These underappreciated groups were mainly Irish, Scottish, and German, while native-born colonists, mainly from Britain, preferred to serve in local militias. The last heroes of the American Revolution that I want to highlight were the ones with the least to gain from it, at least initially. African Americans. Despite an order from George Washington early in the war, ordering recruiters not to recruit black soldiers, but mounting defeats, escalating casualties, the desertion of many white troops, and British Lord Dunmore's proclamation that led to the British using nearly 20,000 African American soldiers, led to Washington accepting the aid of black volunteers. One of the enslaved Africans serving as a black loyalist fighting with Great Britain was a local man named Barney E. Griffith, a trumpeter with the British Army. He was enslaved on Ralph Izard's plantation, now called Cedar Grove, on Dorchester Road. According to British records, Griffith ran away and joined the Queen's Rangers at the Siege of Charlestown and was, and I quote, very useful as a guide. He served as a dragoon and was frequently distinguished for his bravery and activity, close quote. After the war, Griffith was granted his freedom in England. As a result of Washington's change of heart, between 5,000 and 9,000 black patriots joined Washington's army, making up nearly 10% of his total fighting force, firmly staking their claim as Americans worthy of equal treatment. Or for many, worthy of freedom. This part of the story also gives us the opportunity to explore an often overlooked aspect of America's early greatness. Many black patriots were promised freedom, but were never given it. Some tapped into that something that would be used by many marginalized groups over the next 250 years to get justice. America's promise of equal protection under the law. Although those exact words don't come into play until later with the 14th Amendment, the principle still existed. In the case of Ned Griffin, after his enslaver was drafted, he promised Ned freedom if he served in his place during the war. Many rich whites who were drafted set their enslaved Africans in their place. After the war, his owners sold him instead. Ned Griffin sued in a North Carolina court and was granted his freedom. Clearly, all these groups have an equal claim to the creation of this great nation and should be recognized in the celebration of its first 250 years. But without a doubt, it was the brilliance of General Washington's surprise attacks during the battles of Trenton and Princeton, his diplomatic efforts, his sophisticated spy network, and his incredible leadership to hold the army together at Valley Forge that was the main reason we won the war, and later the peace, as our nation's first president. In addition, the diplomatic skills of my boy, Benjamin Franklin, while he was over there in France getting his groove on, secured important foreign alliances from France and Spain. It's reported he had a different alliance every night. This proved critical to the turning the tide of the war, resulting in the United States becoming the first group of colonies in the history of the world to win their independence in war. Something to be proud of. As I always like to do, let's bring this all a little closer to home. Another group of people who are often left out of this story were those who could convincingly argue they won the war for American independence. And since I've been here over the last almost 20 years, y'all say this a lot. So maybe there's actually something to it. But you really hear about them because they didn't fight in Boston, New York, or Virginia. No, they fought right here in the Carolinas. To bring the story even closer to home, we must also acknowledge the role of historic Dorchester. During the American Revolution, Dorchester County was centered around now abandoned trading town of colonial Dorchester, which served as a critical strategic military outpost, primary munitions depot, and a heavily contested gateway between the South Carolina backcountry and the vital port city of Charleston. Dorchester's placement along the Ashley River made it a high-value target for British forces. Fort Dorchester was an important hub because it sat directly along the major wagon road connecting Charleston to the interior backcountry, allowing troops to quickly monitor and intercept enemy movements. In addition, the town commanded Bacon's Bridge, which was a critical crossing point on the Ashley River. As shared with me by Dr. Ed West, there were many battles along Dorchester Road from 1780 to 1782, because the exterior lines around Charleston were controlled by whoever controlled Bacon's Bridge. Fort Dorchester's Tabby Fort served as a munitions depot. In 1775, Patriots heavily reinforced the fort's brick magazine, powder magazine, became a major military depot used to gather and store massive amounts of gunpowder, cannons, lead, and flint for the rebellion. It was in Dorchester County where we first come to appreciate a South Carolina hero. At the beginning of the war, the fort was commanded by a young captain named Francis Marion, who, of course, would later gain legendary fame as the Swamp Fox. He used the post to train militia and secure regional resources. After the British siege of Charleston in May of 1780, British and Loyalist forces seized Dorchester. They transformed the town and the fort into a British military post to secure their hold on the Low Country. They did not hold it for long because of the efforts of a couple of additional famous names. In July 1781, the Continental Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Colonel Henry Light Horse Harry Lee, successfully raided the outpost, forcing a hasty British retreat. It was not long before Patriot forces regained control of Dorchester County. In December of 1781, Major General Nathaniel Greene and future South Carolina Governor Colonel Wayne Hampton led a flying party of Continental Infantry and cavalry to drive the British out permanently. They intercepted a British reconnaissance party at Bacon's Bridge, inflicting heavy casualties and forcing the garrison to retreat back to Charleston. By the end of the 1780s, the town of Dorchester was abandoned, as residents relocated to nearby Summerville or moved further south. Today, the site is preserved as a colonial Dorchester State Historic Site, with the remains of the Tabby Fort and the brick bell tower of St. George's Church still stands as monuments to its Revolutionary War importance. So I don't know if you've been out there, but that's what it looks like today. The church and the Tabby Fort. It is still there today. And I don't know if you've ever been to one, but they have reenactments out there. Anybody ever been to one of the reenactments out there? They're kind of cool. I haven't heard of one. I've been to a couple of them, but I haven't heard of one lately. I mean, they do everything. They reset up the town. They fire off cannons and muskets, show you how to turn, sheep's wool into thread, do all that spinning and stuff. And there's always one booth, I always thought it was kind of interesting, one booth dedicated to the pirates of Charleston Harbor. It's kind of cool. They celebrate the big pirate history of Charleston Harbor. Speaking of that, y'all know who Blackbeard is, right? Anybody know what his real name is? Where he's from?
Peach.
Where's he from?
North Carolina.
He's Charleston.
He's from Goose Creek.
He's from Goose Creek.
North Carolina.
Yeah. No, his daddy was a merchant in Goose Creek. He grew up in Goose Creek. Yeah. Interesting history, right? Interesting history.
Nice.
You go talk to them pirate folks, they tell you all about it. They're happy to tell you all about it. And he was killed in Charleston Harbor. On a ship in Charleston Harbor, Blackbeard. So, very interesting history. So following independence, many of those same leaders played a major role in creating the U.S. Constitution. 55 great men worked through conflict and compromise to design the constitutional framework that has guided this nation for more than 2 centuries. Clearly, it's not a perfect document, because only 39 of those 55 men actually signed it. 4 of those men were from South Carolina: John Rutledge, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, Charles Pinckney, and Pierce Butler. These 55 brilliant men, through trial and error, created a U.S. Constitution that resulted in 3 major branches of government: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. This well-built system was designed to prevent us from ever having a dictator leading our government by creating a system of checks and balances. These 3 co-equal branches continually serve as a great foundation for our nation. However, this only works if each branch enforces its independence and does not yield to partisan politics. So in the words of Forrest Gump, that's all I'm going to say about that. So the design of the U.S. Constitution was solid. For the first time on planet Earth, a nation would be guided by its people. The most important words of the U.S. Constitution are, "We the people." So as a nation, we were founded on 2 documents: the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Both represented great ideas. Both anchored on key principles. Both established great promises, created by great, although not perfect men. On paper, the United States was as good could get. All we had to do was put those words into action. Sectional disputes and financial priorities of the time made that almost impossible. Starting with the Declaration of Independence. Clearly in 1776, the words of the Declaration of Independence were a goal, a promise, but not yet a fact. Clearly all men were created equal by God, but not all men were treated equal. Poor white men did not have the right to vote. The right was reserved to men who had enough money to own property. Black men were obviously not treated equal, since only black people were allowed to be enslaved at this point. Native Americans were not treated equal, as most were denied citizenship until 1924, and their lands were forcibly taken. But one thing that did seem to be somewhat accurate was the starting of the preamble with all men, because even white women had less rights than free black men. In some ways, the U.S. Constitution appeared to be even worse. It made a legal determination that black people were not to be counted as fully human individuals. To accommodate the slave states, they decided to grant them more electoral powers by rigging the electoral map. That sounds familiar. Now, how did they do this? While managing to not mention the word slavery anywhere in the document. You won't find the word slavery in the U.S. Constitution. It's all over it, but you won't find the word slavery. Well, just as it is today, the U.S. Constitution determines how many members of the House of Representatives a state gets. Basic U.S. history, civics class. But counting how many people legally reside, this is based on how many people legally reside in your state. Now understand that before this discussion about the U.S. Constitution, slave-owning states did not want to consider black people as human beings. They were not citizens, they were not equal people. Right? They don't count. They're just labor, no different from my horse, my cow, my mule, whatever. It's called chattel slavery. That they're property, not people. But when it came time to argue the Constitution, they decided, we want to count them as 100% residents of our state. Because the more people you have listed as residents of your state, the more voting power you have in Congress. So now these 4 million folks are humans. They are equal brothers to us. We should count them. They're right there in the backyard. Census taker, go to those little wooden shacks back there and start counting. You're going to be rolling with votes, right? Now we want to count them. So the North was like, nah, man, that ain't fair. You didn't want to count them all this time, but now you want to count them. One thing the South did really good back then, they punked the North effectively very often. You want to fight over? You want to go to blows? No, man, we don't want to go to blows. You better do something. So the North said, all right, we'll do a compromise. We'll do a compromise. So to be specific, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the original 1787 United States Constitution states, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, white indentured servants, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. 3/5 of all other persons. Translation. Enslaved Africans were now legally 3/5 of a human being, according to U.S. law. Woohoo! We're almost there. We're almost there. We're 3/5 of the way there. Man, a little bit further, we're going to be humans. So that's what they did to adjust the U.S. Constitution, to make those Southern slave owners happy and get them to ratify the U.S. Constitution. Okay. Why did they do this? Well, as I pointed out when talking about Thomas Jefferson's first draft of the Declaration of Independence, those men who were against this clause decided to prioritize keeping the 13 independent colonies united over a drawn-out fight about representation. Personally, I think they could have done better. Like maybe half. Don't give them so much power. Come on. Need some better negotiators. I think we can say that today, too, besides it all. Okay. So to their credit, they did not just ignore their anti-slavery beliefs. They skillfully included a provision that from the outside looks like further support for slavery, but eventually was responsible for ending the terrible practice of shipping enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to serve in America. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 states, the migration or importation of such persons, there you go, they don't use the word slavery, the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit, shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808. Now understand, the Constitution was pretty much ratified in 1787, 1788. So that meant 20 years. So on the surface, this clause protects the international slave trade from being stopped for at least 20 years. Y'all can't talk about it, y'all can't try it, you can't mess with my overseas trips to Walmart. We're gonna keep getting Amazon to deliver those dark folk for at least 20 years. Can't touch it. All right, fine, we're not gonna touch it for at least 20 years. We're not gonna touch it. All right, so seems like a win for them. So, but it embedded an opening to end the terrible practice, and in 1808, Congress banned the international slave trade. Now, this did not end slavery. It only ended the legal importation of enslaved people from other countries into our country. And in some ways, it caused even more problems for those enslaved people that were here, because it really started the era of the domestic slave trade, where we can't get any more from the outside. So I got to take her husband and ship him to Philadelphia. I got to take his daughters and ship them to Kentucky. So now they got to move folks that are within the United States. And of course, there were still illegal ships coming in to America. Okay. This is one of my favorites. It's very interesting. As I proceed, I'm going to use African Americans and other groups to demonstrate how the promises made in our foundational documents were long in coming over the first 250 years for marginalized groups. No one summed up the dilemma faced by marginalized Americans when it comes to celebrating the 4th of July than Frederick Douglass. For some reason, the people of Rochester, New York, decided to hire Frederick Douglass as their Independence Day speaker. Okay. Here's a quote from that speech. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. Just the guy you picked to speak for 4th of July? Might want to do your research a little better next time, right? But for many years, African Americans celebrated July the 5th instead of July the 4th, for 3 main reasons. First, for safety reasons. During the 18th and 19th century, I don't know why the history says this during the 18th and 19th century. It's just the exact same thing today, except for the bad part. Let's see what I mean today. During the 18th and 19th century, 4th of July celebrations were heavily fueled by alcohol and intense nationalism. Is that just the 18th and 19th century? I don't think so. All those bottle rockets on my roof the next morning, right? They're not burned down my house. But during this time, white crowds frequently rioted and attacked black communities to celebrate July 4th. Hey, get all liquored up. You never know what's going to happen. Second, because of the clear irony and hypocrisy of Independence Day at that time. Choosing July the 5th was a quiet statement of refusal to accept the second-hand version of a holiday that did not apply to them at that time. During Frederick Douglass' Independence Day speech, which was actually delivered on July the 5th, he said, "This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn." Can't blame a brother for that. And third, to commemorate New York's Emancipation Day, state of New York banned slavery on July 4th, 1827. But to avoid racial violence, over 4,000 black New Yorkers organized a parade down Broadway on July 5th. For African Americans, their contributions to America have often come despite enormous obstacles, including slavery, segregation, discrimination, unequal access to opportunity. Yet through perseverance, sacrifice, innovation, and service, African Americans and other marginalized groups have played a vital role in shaping the nation that we celebrate today. We know this to be true, but a deeper truth allows us to celebrate this important holiday. What eventually made it possible for all groups to prosper in the United States is and always will be those two foundational documents that once were seen as a lie by African Americans and others, but later became a pathway, a catalyst, a springboard, a gateway, and more accurately, an incubator. A highly supportive environment that allowed once underappreciated peoples and talents to force their way into the light of this bright nation. Once American leaders and officials decided to respect their own founding documents by allowing all Americans to grow under their bright lights and fertilizing influences of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, that's when things really started to change. That's when we started to believe that all men were created equal. That's when all Americans were included in We the People. What sparked this change over time? I believe it was the fact that African Americans did not only help build this nation's economy, but they also helped defend it. As mentioned earlier, more than 5,000 African American patriots served during the Revolutionary War. An additional 20,000 served the United States during the War of 1812, and nearly 200,000 during the U.S. Civil War. I see the U.S. Civil War as a major turning point in our nation's history. This is my favorite era to teach when I teach this course in school. This is where I really light up, because this is really that transition point for America. It's a major turning point in a place where you can easily see the good, the bad, and the ugly of these 250 years in one era. You have the good of white abolitionists such as William Lloyd Garrison and Harry Beecher Stowe, who helped build public support for ending slavery, and President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, although it was issued as a military act, not as an attempt to end slavery. It nevertheless transformed the Civil War into a fight for freedom and led directly to 200,000 black men joining the Union Army, allowing them to expedite their own liberation. That's my favorite part of the Civil War. Black people didn't just sit back and wait for somebody to free them. They picked up arms and helped free themselves. After the war, the most impactful good came when white lawmakers, known as the Radical Republicans, fought for the equal rights of all Americans by adopting the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. In class, I teach these as the Black Amendments. That's how easy description for them, because that's really what those were focused on. Just think, the idea of a black person being viewed as a full citizen by these Republicans, or the idea that the words from the preamble of the U.S. Constitution that states, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States of America." The idea that these words covered, protect, provide opportunities for a black person, as well as for a white person, for a woman, as well as for a man, for an immigrant, as well as for a natural-born citizen, will go down in history as radical. Think about that. Congress asking for this to be true was labeled as radical. To me, it's just what the document says, living up to it. These amendments abolish slavery, establish birthright citizenship, we don't need to talk about that, and equal protection under the law, and provided voting rights for black men. Most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, they provide a gateway for all freedoms that were yet to be realized. One of those freedoms would take another 50 years. It took another 50 years before any woman gained the right to vote through the 19th Amendment, a major catalyst for the gains of American women throughout the years. My students, I agree with you, sister. I'm a girl dad, so I firmly agree with you. But my students are always amazed, especially my white students. I always emphasize to my white female students that former slaves got the right 50 years before you did. What does that say about the status of white women? Or women in general during that time? And they were below formerly enslaved black men. That could be a lecture all of its own. It really could be. Okay. So, together, these constitutional changes represent some of the best legal advances in American history and open the door to all the liberties and benefits we enjoy today. Now, this is my favorite benefit of all time. Shouldn't surprise you based on what my profession is. Education. Education played a critical role in African American advancement. And I tell my students, in everybody's advancement, if you take advantage of it. Institutions such as Booker T. Washington Tuskegee Institute, Howard University, along with the creation of many HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, provided centers of learning and of leadership. One man at Tuskegee who took advantage of these new legal rights was a brilliant scientist, George Washington Carver. I know it's popping in your head. The peanut guy. Yeah, that's him, the peanut guy. Access to legal protection enabled him to secure 3 patents for his inventions working with the peanut. But he chose not to patent the vast majority of his agricultural discoveries to ensure his inventions remained freely accessible to all farmers. Thousands of patents have been granted to African Americans who benefited from the legal protections of this great nation. To name a few, we have Thomas Jennings, the first African American to receive a patent in 1821 for basically inventing dry cleaning, which our own Rollins Edwards, who we celebrate here at the museum, he benefited from that as he ran a dry cleaners in Summerville for 40 years. Granville T. Woods, known as the Black Edison, he held over 50 patents, most famously for the induction multiplex telegraph in 1887, which allowed moving trains to communicate wirelessly. Wireless communication in 1887. Yeah, we smart. And Garrett Morgan, who created the 3-color traffic signal we use today and the gas mask that firefighters use to enter smoke-filled buildings. Today, despite representing only 3% of American colleges, HBCUs are responsible for 80% of all black judges, 70% of all black doctors and dentists, 50% of all black lawyers, 50% of all black public school teachers, and 40% of all black engineers in the United States. Clearly very important institutions. Although this is our topic for next month's lecture, many gain freedom through education in Summerville. That's the title of next month's lecture. Come check it out. Enjoy it. Within Summerville community, leaders like Colonel James Beecher and his wife educated members of the 35th United States Colored Troops. Next month, we'll talk about Dr. Charles Shepard's Tea Picker School on Pinehurst Plantation, educated and financially supported many black children and adults in Summerville, and celebrate the financial support of Catherine Kitty Smith Springs and Saul Alexander, who provided funds for schools like the Bank School, the St. Barnabas Mission, and Dr. J.H. Austin of Austin Graded School. So you'll learn a lot more about these folks and what they did if you come next month to celebrate education in Summerville. So beyond military service, African Americans have helped expand the meaning of American democracy itself. The struggle for black civil rights did not benefit African Americans alone. It strengthened democratic rights for all Americans. Think about the groups that have protested and marched since the days of the civil rights movement, right? Women's rights groups, gay rights groups, right? Indigenous people. A lot of folks learned from the civil rights movement and have tried to replicate that. Over the years, leaders such as Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois, Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King Jr., Presidents Abraham Lincoln and Lyndon Johnson and Congressman John Lewis challenged the nation to live up to its highest ideas. Their efforts helped secure voting rights and broader participation in American democracy. It was efforts like these and the foresight of the framers of the U.S. Constitution that made Barack Obama's presidency and Kamala Harris's vice presidency possible. We clearly did not start off this way. One of the hardest pills to swallow concerns how one of our most important sources of protection, created by the United States Constitution, has on occasion let us down. But it has also lifted us up. So let's explore each angle of that. As I've shown, while the nation celebrated independence and liberty, many people were denied both. Even today, we turn to the United States Supreme Court to enforce the promises of the U.S. Constitution. That has not always borne the fruit that we need. During and after slavery, the Supreme Court made three of the ugliest decisions in our nation's history. In the infamous 1857 Supreme Court case Dred Scott v. Sanford, when Dred Scott gained freedom from slavery for him and his wife in a state court, the decision was overturned at the U.S. Supreme Court. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney declared that African Americans were not citizens of the United States and never could be. He claimed that black people, and I quote, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, making it one of the most openly racist decisions in U.S. Supreme Court history.
And who was he?
He was the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme
No.
Court, Roger B. Taney.
Okay.
This was followed up in the post-slavery era with the 1896 Supreme Court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, which gave us the doctrine of separate but equal, leading to an explosion of Jim Crow segregation laws across the United States. Some of you may have lived long enough to have seen some of those signs here in South Carolina. I grew up in Philly, never saw it. No. When discriminatory laws were not enough, Jim Crow laws made it difficult for African Americans to exercise their 15th Amendment right to vote. States used poll taxes, got to pay to vote, literacy tests for people who just came from slavery and couldn't read, grandfather clauses, that's for white people who can't read, but since your grandfather could vote, you can vote too. Don't worry about literacy tests or poll taxes. That's what grandfather clauses were. And white supremacist intimidation to prevent African Americans from exercising their constitutional right to vote. When discriminatory laws weren't enough, discrimination was enforced through violence. Thousands of African Americans were victims of lynchings and mob attacks. By 1877, which we consider in history the end of Reconstruction, in 1868, white mobs lynched over 4,000 black men, women, and children in the United States. 4,000. How many of them do you think were ever convicted of a crime? Zero. Zero. The third case was not against African Americans, but Japanese Americans. After President Theodore Roosevelt decided we could not trust Japanese Americans living in certain areas during World War II, we were fighting the Japanese. He ordered the exclusion and confinement of over 120,000 people of Japanese descent, most of whom were American citizens. But realize we were fighting against Germany and Italy too, but German Americans and Italian Americans were not persecuted in that way. Kind of hard to tell them apart, right? That's probably the big thing. Man, look at those eyes, we got you. Who the Germans are, we're not quite sure, because that might be my grandma. We weren't quite sure. All right, so in the Supreme Court case, Korematsu v. United States, the court declared that President Roosevelt's decision was legal. But do not despair. The United States Court has also represented the good in American history. The landmark case Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954, which included the Charleston, South Carolina case, Briggs v. Elliott, which is another right to go to school case, declared that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. This decision helped dismantle legalized segregation across the entire United States. Another case, although history books credit Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Montgomery bus boycott alone is not what ended bus segregation in Alabama. In case you don't know it, they never gave up. After more than a year of walking and not riding the buses, the bus company was like, nope, keep walking, but we're losing 80% of our income, but keep walking. We're not giving in. So they never actually gave in. It was a 1956 Supreme Court case, Browder v. Gale, that declared segregated public buses unconstitutional. That's what ended that boycott. Next, in 1967, Supreme Court case Loving v. Virginia legalized, Loving v. Virginia struck down all state laws banning interracial marriage, which is I love to teach on day one of my class. There's no such thing as interracial marriage. There's only one race, human race. That's it. So terms like that are an oxymoron. Okay? Unless you're like marrying a horse or something. So in a similar fashion, the 2015 case of Obergefell versus Hodges legalized same-sex marriage. Of course, during this 250-year period, African Americans were not the only group to face discrimination. Native Americans, as we said, experienced forced removal from their lands, broken treaties, and attempts to erase their culture through forced assimilation. And you know, I'm going off script here a little bit because it's something I watched on a newscast from Megyn Kelly the other day. And she said words that kind of bothered me a little bit. The problem with these immigrants is they refuse to assimilate. They refuse to give up their culture for ours. I never saw that as a requirement. You got to come here and forget all about your past, your cultures. Can't celebrate your holidays anymore. That really bothered me. So that wasn't in my script. You got that one for free.
Supposed to be the melting pot.
Right, the melting pot. Embrace everything. No. You got to be 100% American, whatever that is.
Born in it.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever that is. What does it mean? You're born here, but what is the culture? What is our culture? Do we have a unique culture? Yeah, it's multicultural. We all came from somewhere else, right? So women were denied the right to vote until 1920. They faced barriers to education and employment. Students are always amazed when I tell them a woman couldn't divorce their husband. If they had a job, they had to take the money home and give it to their husband. If they didn't have a husband, they had to give it to their father. If they didn't have a father, they had to give it to their older brother. Women were not allowed to control their own finances. Wow. Now, the other way, my wife takes all my money. It only gives me a little bit every once in a while.
I can remember the day I couldn't get a credit card.
Yeah?
She could, but I couldn't.
And you think about it around the world, it's only within the last 10 years that women in Saudi Arabia have been allowed to get driver's licenses. They can finally let them.
Could you tell us what's the difference between indentured servitude and slavery?
Absolutely. Indentured servitude, you sign a contract that I'm going to be your slave for a number of years. It might be usually 5 to 7 years is that period. It was mostly done by white Europeans who couldn't afford the ship money to relocate to the United States. They wanted to come here because things were better here. They couldn't afford it. So usually a landowner here would pay for them to come over, and they signed an indenture contract. And that contract says, you belong to me, I will provide you with food, I'll provide you with clothing, I'll provide you with a place to stay, but no pay. That is your pay. It's room and board. And then at the end of that 5 to 7 year contract, depending on your contract, some folks had it in their contract where they get a stipend at the end of that, a certain amount of money to go out on their own. But for most of them, it was just like, all right, your time is up. Open the front door, go, be free. Enjoy your life. Slavery, yeah, not so much. You're a slave for life. You never get paid. You never get free.
Well, how would a free black? Was that strictly up to the owner to release a slave?
Yes.
And become free?
Yes.
I know they had quite a few of them in Charleston,
Yes.
and
Now,
most of them were skilled workers.
there were several ways that happened. Okay? We have what's called manumission. Manumission. Manumission is when an owner fills out a legal document, certifies it with the court, I am setting John free. John is a free man as of this date, goes to the court, a judge stamps it, John carries those free papers around the rest of his life to prove that he's now free. That's one way that they would do it. Others ways they could do it is if some of the enslaved were skilled laborers. They learned to be carpenters or masons or blacksmiths, and some owners would allow them, usually on Sundays, because that's usually a slave's day off. On Sundays, they can go into town and hire themselves out. And over the years, they save up that money and they buy themselves from their owner. And they establish, so the owner gets a certain amount of money, manumits them, you bought yourself free, what about you? So those are a couple of ways that they can. And we did have, especially early on, it's believed that the first 20 Africans that came to America, I don't necessarily buy it, but let's just go with the history books, that came in 1619 on the Dutch ship, the White Lion, was the name of the ship, that brought them to Jamestown. It says that they came as indentured servants. And you see some of that as being factual, because one of them, I don't know if it's actually one of that 20, but a man by the name of Anthony Johnson. Anthony Johnson was a black man that came here on the ship, maybe not that particular one, and he became free, bought land, and bought black slaves. So this is a black man who owned land and owned black slaves to work that land just like the white people.
Can I just say that my husband's descendants, Edward Doty, was on the Mayflower. He came over from England as an indentured servant.
Wow.
And it was 7 years he would be indentured to this man. So that, I don't know how many others.
Oh, thousands.
On the ship. On that
Thousands.
particular ship.
Yeah.
But, and then in, where the stone is,
Plymouth Rock?
Plymouth Rock.
No, that's fake, right?
Yeah, there's his house there and, some objects that were on the ship. So, I
That is
mean,
cool.
he's real.
Hopefully y'all know Plymouth Rock is fake. It appeared 100 years after the landing.
Yeah.
It basically was a tourist trap.
Still is.
What do you think about of the term African American?
Well, I don't mind it. I use black. I use black, but I will interlace that with African American. Because let's be, well, this is another, y'all hitting a lot of day one of my class, right? So I love doing this on day one of my class. This is speak to your point directly, okay? Day one of my class. Remember, I have a mix of, it's Fort Dorchester, so it's very diverse. So a mix of white students, black students, a lot of Hispanic, a lot of Asian, and so forth. But anyway, I say, okay, raise your hand if you're an African American. So all the black kids raise your hand. So I look at the other kids like, why aren't you raising your hand? So the white people are like, Miss Scarlett, I'm not black. I didn't say you were black. I said, raise your hand if you're African American. I'm not African American. You sure? So then I say, okay, what does African American mean? That you're from Africa. Okay, so let's put it a little bit more scientific term. So you can trace your ancestry back to the continent of Africa. Yes, everybody on the planet traces their ancestry to the continent of Africa. Life began on the continent of Africa. The Great Rift Valley in Ethiopia is where life began for human beings. How do we know that? The oldest human remains ever found on the planet, according to scientists, were found on the continent of Africa.
That's great.
So human life starts in Africa. So technically, everybody's in Africa.
That's a great way to start.
So that's why I kind of prefer black. It's more descriptive. More descriptive. Just don't use color. I had a guy ask me that, right? Is colored okay? It's really not. It's really not. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I figure we're all Americans, okay? I mean,
Yeah. Man, come on now, let's be real. Celebrations, right? Just, it's natural for us to, I'll say congregate to where we're comfortable. Like I tell my students, I truly believe this. I truly believe this. And maybe I'm just trying to convince myself of this because I just love people. I want everybody to just be good people. But I truly believe that the majority of discrimination in the workplace, and especially hiring practices, is not as much racism as it is comfort. I'm gonna surround myself with the people I grew up with, the people who look like the people I grew up with. I'm just naturally more comfortable. I don't have to worry about offending anybody if I just stick with the people I grew up with.
Connections.
Right? Yeah, and you see that every day in the high school lunchroom. Right? When I worked at Cross High School for 9 years, right? 85, almost 90% black. But at lunchtime, you found the white kids. They're all at the same table, in the back corner of the lunchroom, eating lunch together. Why? Did they hate the black people? No, comfort. So that's where that really breaks off. But me, you can't tell, looking at me, I'm a mutt. I did my ancestry DNA. I am 32% European. My mom did her DNA. My mom's only 48% African, 52% European. Like, Mom, you're a white chick. Man. And it makes sense because whenever we do like family reunions on her side of the family, we go to a church in Burlington, North Carolina, is where she's from Winston-Salem. That's where the big family church is. And I swear, everybody in that church look like you. They do look just like you, right? So I walk in there, I'm like, Mom, it's a white church. No, everybody in here is related to you. These are your relatives.
Is it Mormon?
Oh no, it's Christian. But yeah, it's amazing. So we have a problem. We look and we categorize based on what we see. Yeah.
My grandpa, for his 80th birthday, he got one of those DNA tests done.
Mhm.
And looking at him, he looks like, an old Eastern European man.
Mhm.
But he's like 80% Eastern European, and then the rest is Nordic, Russian, Mongolian, Middle Eastern, and North African.
Yeah, we're all. I wish everybody would take a DNA test and say, hey, I'm everything. Like, I'm everybody. We're all just one people with a mixture of over, what, a couple 100,000 years? There's no pure, you gotta go in the deep, deep forests of Africa to find somebody that's not mixed with something, right? It's just not reality.
Thank goodness for DNA.
Yeah, exactly. I wish,
This is
you know,
interesting.
I really wish, and this is very facetious of me, I admit it, don't think bad of me for this, but I really wish it was a registration requirement to join the Klan, to have your DNA done.
Oh.
Oh, that would be fun.
You're 20% black, get out! That'd be so cool, right?
Even the MAGA.
Yeah.
People, oh yeah.
So,
It would be-
there was an episode on one of those TV shows, talk shows, Wendy Williams or somebody, I don't think it was her, but she had this neo-Nazi on her show or whatever, and they did his DNA. And he was 10% African. And she's like, what's up, my brother? He was a little upset.
Thomas Jefferson, hey, look at.
Don't get me started, I'm not going there. Let me continue with my lecture. Well, I still have, the president of the museum's back there, so don't get me off on that tangent. I might get fired. All right, let me finish. I'm getting close to the end. My tape probably ran out by now, I hope not. Okay, is it still going? Check it, Steve. I may have shut off. I have another battery if it did.
Oh, I didn't see the camera.
So go on, all right, good. Whew. All right, so let me close with this. Here we go, perfect timing. Let me close with this. Our history is not solely a story of oppression. It is also a story of resilience, courage, and progress. Landmark developments such as the Bill of Rights, the Emancipation Proclamation, 13th, 14th, and 15th, and 19th amendments, which gave women the right to vote, to the U.S. Constitution, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Housing Rights Act of 1968, helped dismantle many forms of legal discrimination. Similar movements advanced the rights of women, Native Americans, immigrants, the disabled, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. Civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s brought together people from many backgrounds in a nationwide effort to achieve equality. African American leaders, such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, John Lewis, were joined by concerned whites, Jewish leaders, labor leaders, and student allies who supported the movement's goals of justice and equal rights for all Americans. And let us not fail to realize these civil rights actions were only possible because of the United States Constitution, signed in 1787, and the accompanying Bill of Rights, added in 1791, that granted these groups freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and perhaps equally important, freedom of the press. Because it was the news reporters at the time who moved politicians to action. Here are two examples. In 1946, Army Sergeant Isaac Woodard, the guy in the center there, was returning home to Batesburg, South Carolina, after serving this great nation during World War II. He was pulled from the bus for having an argument with the driver. The local chief of police savagely beat him and used his nightstick to poke out his eyes. This assault by South Carolina police, while he was still in full Army uniform, galvanized national outrage. This severe injustice pressured President Harry Truman to confront Jim Crow brutality, directly contributing to the 1948 federal desegregation of the military, a move that personally enhanced my life and broadened my possibilities, culminating a 30-year military career that I enjoyed. Second, on March 7, 1965, and what would become known as Bloody Sunday, civil rights marchers attempting to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, were brutally attacked by law enforcement and deputized citizens. This violence was captured by television cameras and newspaper photographers, shocking everyday Americans and pressuring President Lyndon Johnson to take action, which resulted in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, eliminating artificial state obstacles to voting for African Americans. Sadly, recent changes have all but dismantled the 1965 Voting Rights Act. But today's American story also includes state and federal programs designed to help less fortunate Americans. Although not everyone sees these programs as beneficial to the country at large. These include New Deal policies provided by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Great Depression, President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program that gave us Medicaid, Medicare, and Head Start, and the strengthening of our armed forces by President Ronald Reagan, leading directly to America winning the Cold War. These efforts have provided support and hope to millions of Americans. The best history of the United States is ultimately the story of we the people, working together to build a stronger nation, which for me will always go down as the main good that resides in the hearts of most Americans, enabling me to hold my head high as I travel around the world as a proud American. I truly believe this nation is worth celebrating and that most Americans truly believe the words of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Thank you for listening.